Tameika Isaac Devine is a mother, a wife, a lawyer, a city councilwoman, and now a candidate for mayor of Columbia. I talk one-on-one with Tameika for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Tameika Isaac Devine, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Hello, Quintin. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, ma'am. Well, you know, I've interviewed Mayor Benjamin for many, many years, and I've always wanted to interview you, so here we are.
Well, it's my honor and pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. I'm a very huge fan of Columbia, particularly downtown Columbia, so it's always, good to go up there and get on Main Street and the Vista whenever I can. But I know that obviously you are a candidate for the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina. You are obviously a wife, a mother, a business professional, women's leadership speaker, a lawyer, city councilwoman at large. Who else is Tameika Devine right now these days?
And now Tameika is candidate for mayor. So not like I didn't have enough stuff that I was doing.
Right.
But it's all good because everything that I do is about service and service to the community. And so adding in this extra level of being a candidate really has just gotten me to interact with folks more as I listen to them. Like I'm always out and about working, but I'm listening to them about kind of their views of the city. So that's kind of, what I'm doing. I'm running nonstop, typically on about 4 to 5 hours of sleep at night, which I do not suggest. But it's all good. It's been fun. It's been really fun to be able to, this is home for me. This is my hometown. And so it's been fun to kind of engage with folks with the mindset of, potentially becoming their mayor one day.
What are the views are you hearing from the constituents when it comes to obviously the future of Columbia?
Yeah, so the way I've approached things is I always tell people that I don't shy away from challenges, and COVID-19 and economic issues have proposed challenges, but I always look at things as where do we find opportunities. And so I've been doing what I call divine listen sessions, and so I've been meeting with small groups of folks and talking about kind of some of the opportunities that they see. And I'm going to be honest with you, Quintin, I kind of know a lot of the things that go on in the community, but I've been hearing people talk about just really embracing where we're going to go in the city as far as green energy and whether or not there's any opportunities that are coming out of COVID that will allow us to deal with the climate issues that we've been talking about for years. I've been talking to folks about reimagining work and understanding that COVID taught us a whole lot about remote working. It taught us a lot about folks who were working 2 and 3 job essential workers and that they don't get paid nearly what they need. And so what opportunities are there for them to be part of, the economic strength of our city? And then I talk to people just about things like, when people were home and we weren't in cars as much, the streets were safer for bikes. And it's like, when is the city going to invest in more biking infrastructure like you guys have in Charleston? I love going to Charleston and being able to get on a bike because I feel safer. And we haven't had that in Columbia. So those are some of the things that I'm hearing from folks. And then, of course, the regular stuff I hear from folks is just, as the city grows, is every part of the city part of that growth? Downtown, like you mentioned, is doing really well, and people are proud of downtown, but people want to see that same level of investment and priority to Millwood and Two Notch and Farrow Road. And so how do we make sure that we are including everybody in the city in our growth?
Let me just jump right into it, because I want to ask you this. What is the economic growth for the city of Columbia right now?
Mm-hmm. So, the city is going well now. COVID has challenged all of us. We've seen a decrease. This year we're looking at, revenue decreasing around $20 million. And primarily, when we look at our hospitality, which is where we do a lot of our, the investments on Main Street, the streetscapes and stuff we do from our hospitality tax money. So we're seeing those challenges just like any other city. But I do think what we are also seeing is, again, opportunities like how do we take advantage of, pulling things and resources together instead of folks always looking at the city to how we fund things, how do we get nonprofits to work together to do things in the community, how do we look at investing in our infrastructure to not only create jobs, but then create attractive places for other people to invest in. So as I look at the city's growth over the next few years, I'm really excited because there's so many opportunities. There's large parcels. I mean, Bull Street this morning, I went through the drive-through at Starbucks and got some coffee, and it's a beautiful morning. So I went and sat in the new public park that we have over there and drank my coffee and ate my Beyond sausage breakfast sandwich. But looking at Bull Street and how that's developing. But Bull Street isn't the only area that's developing. We've got large parcels on Millwood Avenue, on Farrow Road, on North Main Street, and that people are looking at for development. So to your question on economic growth, I think there's so many opportunities. I think that's the key word, is opportunities. There's so many opportunities. So how do we as a city create a culture and environment that makes those private investments dollars come into those areas of the city that haven't always been part of the city's growth and development?
What are those dollars that are coming into those particular developments in areas right now?
We've got several developers who are kind of looking. So like right now, we've got Main Street developer Scott Middleton and his family, who have done the 1600 block of on Main Street, are looking. They're doing a development on North Main, the Stone Manufacturing Building, and it's going to be a brewery. It's going to have an amphitheater. So it's going to be really nice amenity, really good, and really it's on the anchor end of North Main. And so as you think about the development as it goes down, it will continue out. There's a huge parcel further down North Main that developers are looking at right now, and it'll be mixed use. It'll have some housing. They're looking at some commercial development. We've got a development on Farrow Road that's going to be coming, and that's going to be mixed use as well. It's going to be housing, but it's also, they're looking at how do you put some, maybe a community grocery store, some things that will help support the residents who already live there. We've got First Nazareth Church has a huge parcel across the street from First Nazareth. They are working with a private developer as to doing a development there. So, so the thing is about, again, creating that culture that supports that private investment, partnering people together, and see how do we get developments in other areas of town, in addition to what's happened to downtown and Bull Street.
Now, I ask this a lot, doing Quintin's close-ups, and I want to ask you this. What incentives do you want developers to bring into the city of Columbia?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. So, I think I want developers to come into the city and not thinking, okay, oh wow, this is a great opportunity for me to make money, but an opportunity for you to really truly be part of the community. And that means hiring people here and creating jobs in our community, adding in amenities that support the environment. Just being part of Columbia. One of the things that I talk about a lot is understanding as you have a development, that development is bigger than a brick and mortar structure that's coming out. But it can really be a lifeline for investing in the community, because as it creates jobs, as it creates well-paying jobs, it's supporting families who are living in the community. As it's, building something that the neighborhood needs, like a grocery store or a pharmacy, you are providing support and services that, people will will need. And then we all know this, that if people who live here spend their dollars, and then the people who have those developments are invested in this community, those dollars will stay in our community. And so that's really what I am looking for, are developers who want to come in and be part of the community, not just come in and develop and then make money and leave, or your headquarters is somewhere else, but understand that as you develop in Columbia, you are part of the Columbia community. And with that comes, we expect you to be a great community partner and continue to want to do things to help us build our city.
And you talked earlier about jobs. Let me ask you this, Ms. Devine. How many jobs have been lost in Columbia over the past 4 years?
I'm be honest, Quintin, I don't know that number. I will say that I think that when you think about jobs being, quote, lost, I think what we're doing is we're creating different jobs. Where I'm focusing on is how do we create jobs that will be well-paying jobs, especially folks in our lower wealth communities. When you think about going back to the pandemic, you think about and to that point, and I wouldn't say 4 years, but like even in the last year of the pandemic, you've had restaurants close, you've had some stores close, and those are jobs that have been lost. But then how do we look at that opportunity and say, okay, that job is not necessarily lost. How do we transition that job into something else? Because maybe that store was already struggling because of retail, and then COVID like really just kind of knocked it out of the park. So that store closed. So how do we make an opportunity for those employees, that worked at that store to actually get other jobs that are happening now. So right now, STEM is very, very big. And not only do we have amazing technical college at Midlands Tech, and then they have partnerships with USC, right, but Richland One, our school district, is doing great in training young folks in STEM. And so again, it's kind of thinking how reimagining work, and I'll give an example. So during the presidential primary, I hosted many of the presidential candidates because I personally didn't want to pull my support around one person or another because I liked them, or I was familiar with them because they had served in a different capacity. I wanted to do my due diligence and know really who I thought would be the best candidate. And I'll tell you that one of the candidates, Andrew Yang, he talked a lot, and this was a year and a half ago. He talked a lot about how we as community leaders needed to reimagine work, because work as we know it would be changing because of artificial intelligence, robots, people going out of retail, going out of business, folks deciding to have remote work. There were a lot of things that he talked about then. And so if we did not get in front of that, we would see, to your point, jobs being lost. And so here in Columbia, I kind of listened. Okay, perfect then. But oops, live TV. So, yes, ma'am. But I will tell you, I listened to that. And so perfect. I was thinking already before COVID, we didn't expect that, COVID would hit and we would get accelerated, but I'd already started talking about that. And so we were like thinking about, how do we train different, in different ways? So I've been talking to Midlands Tech about the programs that they have. Richland One, I actually have a little bit of a benefit there because my husband is on the board. And so I always would talk to him about, what are you guys doing? And they have a strategic plan on how do we reimagine and work. So to your question, I think that we look at, yes, there are some jobs that have left our community, but we need to be able to create and build better jobs as we come out of the COVID and as we look forward. And so what I would say is probably within the next year, I think you'll find that not only have we it might be a net loss, but actually we've created new jobs because we've got other opportunities that weren't really here before.
And what is that net loss right now?
I don't know. I have not. So that's really because I'm gonna be honest. So the city itself, we don't keep those numbers. That would be the Department of Employment and Workforce. Sure. So that would be a number that they would have. I will tell you that, to be really honest, we still have lots of folks who are dealing with unemployment, right, due to, there were people who were unemployed before COVID. COVID really exacerbated that. And so those are one of the things when I talk about opportunities, those are the things that I think we need to be focusing on. We don't need to just talk about what COVID did, but we were already experiencing things before COVID. And so how are we addressing that so that we have folks who live here, who call Columbia home, that can afford to live in the city, that can have jobs that, that don't take that the salary takes all their money so that they can't afford, to have a car or to, save for their kids or other things. And so that's really, I think, my focus over the last 4 to 5 years has been how do we support economic mobility for all of Columbians? And so, part of that with, just even think about jobs. One of the things I'm very big, you talk about being a wife and mom, whatever, I'm very big at exposing our young people to different things. And so, we've done we've done small business camps for young people. We've got 12-year-olds in Columbia making big bank when you talk about money because they've developed their own businesses. And so how do we make those opportunities real for every kid in Columbia so that not only are we looking at people to bring in an industry that employs people, but how do people in Columbia actually create their own jobs and then be able to employ other people? And entrepreneurship is something that's really, really important to me, and I think really important to the city. And you'll see how many new businesses will actually probably come out of COVID too.
Now, this might be an off the topic question, but how do you encourage and enhance federal opportunity zones in Columbia in order to have the maximum job growth there?
And I'm sorry, something just buzzed on my.
Oh, no worries.
Hoping.
Oh, no worries. How do you encourage and enhance federal opportunity zones in Columbia in order to have the maximum job growth there?
Oh, great question. So what I would say, I have a lot of respect for Senator Tim Scott, and I think the opportunity zones, as initially proposed, was a starting point. But I definitely think that they need to be redone. And so I know Congressman Clyburn is working on some amendments to the federal opportunity zones. I'll say for me, I'm on the board of the National League of Cities, and one of the things that we've been lobbying for and advocating for is a change to the opportunity zones that requires a certain level of not just investment and development in the opportunity zone, but as someone develops an opportunity zone, a requirement that, similar to what we had before. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the empowerment zones that we had like 20 years ago. It kind of predates both of us, but Columbia did really well with employment and with CEZ employment zones, because what they did is they required that you created jobs and you hired people from the census tract that you were trying to target. And so what we've been lobbying for opportunity zone changes is have those similar requirements. In addition to having those similar requirements, require some kind of equity for people within the community. So perfect example, I talked about a track on Fair Road that we are looking at development. The folks that are developing are folks who will also be partnering and potentially have equity opportunities for people who live in the community to be a part of the growth and the success of that business. And so, just to your point, I think the question really is how do we create an opportunity zone to really truly be an opportunity for everybody, not just the folks who are getting the tax incentive or tax and credit, but for the folks that you're actually targeting in that community so that the entire community benefits from the investment that our opportunity zone brings.
If you were to get your hands on the census data right now, what would you target right now as far as looking at and focusing on as far as the future?
Wow. So there's a couple census tracts. And I've mentioned a couple of them, but I think, over there off of Millwood, like where Hard Street and Millwood is a big area. Of course, North Columbia, 29203 is a huge area. I think you also look at the Two Notch Road area. So those are some census tracts that I think. And then also, if you look down Garner's Ferry, Ferry is growing. It's growing a lot, but there's also still pockets off of Garner's Ferry that still need resources. I think people, they forget about that area and say, okay, you're going towards Lower Richland. Lower Richland is growing, but as you talk about the corridor going down towards Lower Richland, there are pockets there that I think if you look at the census numbers there, you still have some lower wealth communities that certainly need some investment.
And what are those investments that you are looking at right now?
Oh gosh, if I had a crystal ball, or if I had a magic wand. So really, Quintin, I will tell you, my investments are about investing in the entire person, entire family. And so when I think about investments, I don't think you can talk about jobs alone. You talk about jobs, you talk about services, you talk about training, you talk about supporting the entire family and making sure those needs are. So one of the things I've done recently is I reached out to, we have like 20 nonprofits that are working in one area. Part of it is they're doing great things, but they're all kind of working in their silos. And so when I think about the families that they're serving, how do we pull those services together? So an investment in that entire family. So do we make sure that, of course, there's food access. So, we're talking about, not living in a food desert. We have food access. Make sure that they have job training in order to get better paying jobs. Making sure that they are that if there are, I don't want to say deficits. I don't mean in a deficit. I'm trying to think of the word. I mean, if there are, if there's support that they need to actually advance themselves personally, that is available to them as well. If there's some mentoring or something that the kids aren't getting, that we have that as well. And so when I think about investments, I think it's hard to say, it should be this or that. I think all of those things together are what we need to be looking at as far as not just the city, but the Midlands. One of the great parts about being in the Midlands is we have a lot of good resources, but the fact that we have a lot of good resources, we have the folks who come here for those resources, and we don't always have enough resources. So, when we think about, Richland One has one of the highest special education populations in the state. The reason being is because as a parent, if I have a special needs child, I'm going to want to come to Columbia because DDSN is here and social services, I've got resources here. But that resource, me moving here with my child to be closer to the resources, also puts extra responsibility on the school district. And so we need to be thinking about what are the school district's needs to make sure that they're serving the whole child, and where the school district can't do it, what investments need to be made by either the city or the county or the state in order to support that whole child, ultimately supporting that whole family.
And this might be a redundant question, but how do you close that needs gap?
One step at a time, one family at a time. Yeah, I mean, that's really the only way I see it. I mean, I think that people can look at the gaps and be overwhelmed by it and say, well, we're never going to fix this. And they just kind of dismiss it. For me, I'm somebody, I'm never going to give up. I think that we're always going to have gaps. You got to have bold leadership in order to want to address the gaps. And then you also have to recognize that not every one agency can do it all. So again, the whole partnership, collaborating. And I'll give you a perfect example. So recently, we had a situation with one of our unsheltered citizens who also has mental health issues. And there was a revolving door. He is touching every single agency, from the police department to Alvin S. Glenn to mental health, and it's just kind of, it was a revolving door. And so I was talking, part of my legal work is I also do mental health commitments. And so I'm familiar with the system. I'm familiar with how grossly under funded they are. And over the last 5 years, the state has continued to underfund mental health services, unfortunately. But I do know that there are a lot of services that are there. And so when we were talking about this gentleman, I was like, I refuse to believe that we can't do something to help him. This man has mental health issues. He is living on the street that is not safe for him or other folks, and we've got to do something. And so we pulled together DSS, we pulled together DMH, we pulled together the probate court, we pulled together the city police department, we pulled together the United Way, and we all met about this gentleman. And and as we communicated, we realized that there were gaps, but the gaps that were there were already community resources that might could fill them. They just weren't a government resource. And so how do we pull those resources and help them? And so ultimately, this gentleman is now off the street. He is getting some help. And so I use that example as a way to show that, you're going to have gaps, and where the gaps are, we need to look at how do we create services to fill those gaps. But part of the gaps might have stuff that already can support them, but the problem is you don't have a whole lot of collaboration among, public and private partnerships and collaboration to say, okay, what are, look at the situation, let's figure out where the gaps are, and is there something that we have existing that could fill that gap? And in this situation, we did.
Now, what type of bold leadership would you have for mental health and homelessness?
Well, I'm excited to say that we are actually already working towards some of that. So right now, we are probably about 2 weeks away from the City of Columbia Police Department having a full-time social worker embedded in the police department. And so as our officers encounter someone who might be living on the street and they encounter somebody with mental health issues, we have a social worker who can kind of deal with that. And then that social worker can, just to that point of that other situation, can reach out to the other partners and see, how do we serve this person? Best practices model, which we're working towards, is how do you have a criminal justice coordinated committee? You guys have it in Charleston,
Right.
And I've been very, very pleased with what they're doing in Charleston. And so we are actually in the planning stages of a pilot here in Columbia to do that, modeled after what you're doing in Charleston. And then going back to homeless, actually, you guys in Charleston, we have a homeless court. We had the very first homeless court in the state of South Carolina, which was one of the things that I proposed several years ago and we implemented. And so then Charleston, you guys came up here, watched what we were doing, and then now you have a homeless court. And I'll tell you, the number of folks that, and these are some of the hardest cases. So the number of folks that have been actually taken off the street because they got the resources available at homeless court is astounding. Is it where we need to be yet? Absolutely not. But it's a help and it's a resource. And so to that point, and I know a lot of the stuff that I'm saying is about like just really, there's no sense of reinventing the wheel. But when I say bold leadership, it's like thinking outside the box, not just saying, okay, we've always done it this way, and so let's continue. How do we think outside the box? And that's what my leadership has been about. How do you think outside the box, from creating our criminal domestic violence court that we have in the city, to the homeless court that we now have, and the mental health court that we're forming. How do we, create a criminal justice coordinating council? That's not a new idea, but it required thinking, changing the way we do business, looking at a best practice model like what you have in Charleston, and how do we adapt that to our community? Ours isn't going to be the same as Charleston's because our needs are different and what we have here is different. And from what I understand in Charleston, I think it deals more with some of the recidivism rate of folks who come into the criminal justice system. Ours is likely going to focus a lot more on our homeless and mental health population because those are some of the toughest cases that we have in the city. But it makes sense because mental health is here, our Department of Corrections is here. So Columbia, we have probably a different population when it deals with our unsheltered citizens' experience in mental health than you have in Charleston. So it makes sense that our program is just a little bit different.
When you look at the numbers of homelessness, what are you focused on right now?
When you say right now, COVID presents different problems for us. So because of COVID, you have less ability to have a place that is shelters, and so the level is a little bit different. So right now, our focus is keeping our unsheltered citizens safe from COVID. Eventually, I am talking with Prisma Health right now and figuring out how do we really hit that population with the vaccines. Everybody's talking about, people getting vaccinated, and they're talking about our seniors and, working with churches and doing this. Well, our unsheltered citizens may not have those same pipelines. And so how do we focus on getting them vaccinated? So I will tell you, when you say right now, what I look at for the homeless right now may be different than what I would focus on January of 2022, because we're dealing with a different environment. But ultimately, for me, I would like to see us, number one, have our unsheltered citizens living in a city that respects them, because we know that we'll always have homeless. That every city has homeless. But it's how do you make sure that you're providing the resources necessary that you can help them, give them the services to help keep them off the street, keep them safe, and also keep others safe. We do have folks who are on the street because they fell on hard times. They might have addiction problems. They may have mental health problems. We also have people on the street who might be evading the law and other things like that. And so I think there's not one size fits all that addresses our unsheltered citizens and the homeless population. So you got to figure out what is the real core of your population, and then what's going to help them, and figure out how to have the services that affect them. So Housing First is a model that we have here, and they deal with a lot of chronic folks. We have Mercy, which is our mental illness recovery center. Mercy's doing amazing work. I just wrote a letter of recommendation for them to build something for youth, because that's another growing population in the homeless population is young people. And so it's hard to say, you want to do one thing or the other for the homeless, because they're just like the rest of us. They're diverse. And so you've got to have different things that are going to meet their needs. But I think that for anybody in city leadership and in county leadership, we need to be looking at how do we provide services and have most of those things being able to be addressed across the spectrum and the continuum of care for those who are homeless.
This might be another complicated question, but what are the characteristics of the homeless population that you will eventually serve?
Just kind of what I just thought. I mean, there's a lot. So there's, folks who are experiencing mental illness. There are folks who have addiction problems. There are folks who, are just really hard on their luck. I mean, they were living paycheck to paycheck and may have gotten evicted. South Carolina has the highest eviction rate in the country. Charleston, not nothing in Charleston, but
right.
One of those things. Thank goodness for Charleston that Charleston had it worse than us here in Columbia. But but eviction is, it's real. I spoke to a young lady, a mother of 4 this weekend, who's going to be evicted next month. This month. It's now March, so she's going to be evicted. And in conversating with her, there are a lot of issues. But and right now, potentially in a week, she'll be homeless because she has nowhere to go. And I'm going to be trying to help her find some place. But that, but that's a segment. So there are so many, it's hard to say. But I think the point is, and I'm glad you asked that question, Quintin, because I think that folks, they see the visible homeless on the street and they want to paint it with a broad brush and say, oh, those are folks who are, criminal, or they have addiction problems, and just leave it at that. There's so many issues with folks who are experiencing homelessness. And so I think until we all understand that they are just like us and they're very diverse, and so they have different needs and there's different characteristics, you're not going to ever really get to the heart of the problem, because you're not really, you're probably ignoring some of the root causes of the homelessness that these people are experiencing.
And let me turn over to, obviously, the police department, that is. How many donut holes in and around Columbia pose an imminent threat to the Columbia's police department's crime-fighting efforts?
I wouldn't say that any of them pose an imminent threat, because we have a great working relationship with the sheriff's department. Sure. And so, unlike in years past, we have a great police department with great relationship with the sheriff's department. And I have to say that is a testament to Chief Skip Holbrook. And so really, honestly, even think about it, Skip Holbrook, as he's come in, he has brought in fresh eyes. He has brought in a dedication and a level of service to this city that is really unmatched. And so it may be a donut hole, but it doesn't mean it's going to be uncovered. So I wouldn't say that any donut holes actually pose an imminent threat. Where I think donut holes pose more of an issue, I'll say more of an issue. Probably one of the issues more so for donut holes is the fact that, let me say that. It's kind of, so 2 things. What I will say is, for the law enforcement part, ideally, you're going to have some areas that are city, some areas that are county. Right. So ideally, for the safety and security, we have one 911 center. And so ideally, you want to have GIS and other technology that regardless of where that location is, when there is a 911 call, that you have an officer there on the spot immediately to take care of it. And if the closest officer is a City of Columbia officer, you want that City of Columbia officer to come and be able to at least secure whatever until a county officer comes. So let me just put that out of the way. But what I was about to say about donut holes is, I think one of the bigger things for donut holes to me is code enforcement and zoning. The city and the county have different rules and different regulations. And so the biggest concern that I hear from the constituents I serve is, I called about this house, this boarded up house, this burnt down house, this one, whatever. Well, the city might have rules. We have a quality of life court that deals with a lot of that. And so somebody might say, well, I want this in quality of life court. And, right across the street from you is not the city, it's the county. And so we can't deal with that house the way we would if it was in the city. So to me, that's the bigger concern with donut holes. And that's really a state issue. We have been lobbying for several years to get legislation to help us be able to annex donut holes. If there's an area that's completely surrounded by a city, it makes sense that we would be able to annex that and bring it to the city so that it won't be a donut hole. That legislation, along with lots of other things on the state level, unfortunately, has just not gone anywhere. But it doesn't mean that we're going to stop trying. We're going to continue to lobby and talk to our legislators and get them to pass legislation that will allow us to deal with those donut holes.
What is the quality of life in the city of Columbia?
I would say it's amazing. We are named in the last 3 or 4 years, we've been named in a lot of lists as one of the best places to live. I mean, we have a great mild climate. We have great jobs. We have a low commuter. Although if you ask my mom who lives in Northeast Columbia and it takes her 25 minutes to get home, she'd probably say it's probably not that low. Yeah. But for the most part, you have low commuter rates. We've got great things, amenities as far as recreation, social. So the quality of life is amazing in Columbia. And so what I would tell anybody is that Columbia is a place that unfortunately some people don't experience because they're used to other things. But I mean, as a person who lives in Columbia and has lived in Columbia all my life, and I said this on a panel the other night, I do things, I call them staycations. And my family and I, we intentionally do something during our staycation weekends that we've never done or hadn't done in a long time in Columbia. And that has included going to Congaree National Park. That's included, before we had younger kids, going down the river in a kayak. Yes. It includes, hanging out at the zoo. Yeah. And going to the ballet. I mean, there's so many things to do in Columbia. And so I think that's why our quality of life is so good. And that's why we've been named in the top 10 of the best places for millennials to move over the last few years, because folks are finding out that Columbia is definitely a gem. You have lots of things to do here, but you have to actually expose yourself to it. And then when you also talk about quality of life, I mean, the reality about quality of life, our healthcare system, hospitals and other things, those are things that other people, metrics that you look into the quality of life. So I would say it's amazing. There's always room for improvement. And, that's why I'm running for mayor, so that I can continue to build on things and work with other folks to show how awesome our capital city is.
Yeah. I always wanted to live on Main Street, so that's a goal.
Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you, Quintin. So I shared this the other night too, and I tell people that too. Think about the fact that Columbia, and this is something that I've said a lot when I speak about Columbia, but Columbia really truly is what we call a city, an 880 city. That is actually a national metrics that people use, and what it means is you have a city that is good for you, whether you're 8 years old or you're 80 years old. And so what I tell people is you have to realize that, we're all, some people talk about, oh, so-and-so, young people are moving here, young people are moving there. But I will tell you find a lot of young people who will move somewhere else. And then once they, get married, they have children, sometimes they move back because they want the things that we have to offer. You don't have to move somewhere to get it at whatever age you are. We're a city that, whether you're 8 or 80, there's something for you here in Columbia. And so I laugh at the reason I thought about that is, for me, I've got, I'm married, I've got 3 kids, including a 4-year-old. Main Street would not work for me. I couldn't find a place to live on Main Street, but I live very close to Main Street. And so I live down North Main. I can jump on my bike. I can, and once we get all those great bike lanes that I just talked about, I can ride my bike up to Main Street enjoy Soda City,
Oh, yes.
go to Mass General,
Yes.
Just go to the State House and,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
look around and stuff. I can do all of that and still, and still live in a nice house, just right outside of Main Street District. So, we really truly have something for people in any age, no matter where you are and what stage you are in your life.
Well, that's amazing. And let me talk to you about affordable housing. Do you have any plans to increase the fees to charge private developers who refuse to incorporate affordable housing into multi-story apartment complexes?
So what you're talking about is inclusionary zoning.
Yes, ma'am.
I personally, so under our form of government, I can't do anything myself.
Mm,
So it would have to be a majority of council to
sure.
look at that. Inclusionary zoning is actually something that I think that our entire state needs to look at. And one of your representatives, Marvin Pendarvis, has been
Right.
trying to get that passed. And I have written a letter in support of his legislation because I do think we need that tool in our toolbox. Is that the only tool? No. I think I was actually just on the phone this morning with an affordable housing developer who he does amazing work throughout the Midlands. And I just connected him with a county council member because he's looking at a piece of property that's not in the city, it's in the county. So I connected him there. He doesn't require any forcing. He doesn't require any incentives. He just wants the government to support him so that when people say we don't want this in our backyard or whatever, that we're working with him and helping educate our constituents why this is a good thing. So to your question, I don't think that's the only thing that's required in order for us to add more affordable housing into the market. I think that we need to have that tool in our toolbox, but I think what we also need to do is be at the table with these affordable housing developers and find out what they need. Luckily, the state just passed a tax incentive, so similar to the tax credit that they would get from federal. Now they have a state one, and that has been a game changer for the affordable housing developers that I've talked to. So a lot of them actually don't need incentives as much as they used to. What they do need, again, is they need the local government to support the placement and location of these affordable housing complexes.
What is in your toolbox to slow down gentrification?
That's a great question, Quentin. And I would say right now, what's in our toolbox is not enough. What I would say, so you want growth in the city, but you want inclusive growth. Inclusive growth means that you need to preserve the housing stock that we currently have. And so some of the things that you want to do is make sure that, as folks get older and want to stay in their homes, that we are able to support them in keeping their homes up to code. And we also support encouraging them to have estate plans so that when they do pass on, that the house goes to somebody in their family who will be able to keep it up and don't lose it at a tax sale or something else.
Right.
Because that's what you're finding. What I see more so in Columbia now. Charleston, you guys have it a lot worse than we do as far as gentrification. And I think, and no offense, I think the part of it is probably not having folks who are in tune to understanding that as development that you want also comes growing pains, and you need to make sure that you are intentional in keeping particularly Black and brown neighborhoods affordable and people who have traditionally lived there stay there. I think Columbia, we have that. I just led a conversation among our city leadership of the color of law. And if you're not familiar with this book, it's called The Color of Law: How Government Segregated America. And so it talks about the history nationally of how government, state, local, and federal policies segregated America, created housing projects for lower wealth communities, and built them near, industrial laundries and railroad tracks and other things that were not desirable for other folks. It talks about how, yes, gentrification, how, like here in Columbia many, many years ago, University of South Carolina wants to expand. And so you take out Ward 1 and Willow Hill to allow for the expansion of the University of South Carolina. So it's a real thing. But as I led this conversation, what happened was, the reason I was moved to do it is, even talking to my colleagues, they weren't aware of even our own city's history and how our city developed the way it did, completely, gentrifying, Black and brown neighborhoods. And so when we had that conversation, then we also talked about what things do you do to move forward. So like I mentioned, we don't necessarily have a lot of those tools right now, but those are tools that I'd like to put in place and I'd like to advocate for in working with my colleagues. And what those tools are, yeah, do we have, grants that help older citizens keep their houses up so that they don't fall in disrepair and they could have code violations and that kind of thing? How do we incentivize more, communities of color to continue to build in their neighborhoods where there might be vacant lots or other things? How do we've done a lot with infill housing, but how do we do more of that? So those are some tools. But one thing, what I would also say is that is why I love being so in tune nationally. I serve on the National League of Cities board, and every single conference, we have one next week, every single conference, we hear and learn from other cities and what they're doing. There are some cities that have done some really great things to not only keep down gentrification in their community, but also reinvested substantial dollars in communities that have been underserved and traditionally disinvested in, and targeted them for people who have moved out of the city. And so those are some of the things that I think that we need to continue to learn from other cities and what they're doing, and then be the leader on creating our own programs that actually incentivize Black people's home, not just home ownership, but also business ownership in the city.
Now, since COVID, what has it been like for the average minority business in the city of Columbia?
I mean, I hear people say a lot, when the larger community gets a cold, the Black community gets the flu. I think that is somewhat true. But I also will say that, the city has, again, it's about intentionality. The city has intentionally been to the point where we have really tried to preserve our small minority businesses during COVID. And so we as a city, and I believe we were probably the first city in the state of South Carolina, but we as a city, we were the first ones to actually have a grant program to our small businesses. So as small businesses were trying to get PPP program money, a lot of our businesses already had money from us because we did that. So, and we made sure, unlike PPP that went to majority businesses, we made sure that the folks who got our assistance looked like the city of Columbia. And so, our Office of Business Opportunity Director and others were going to the barbershops and the nail salons and the beauty shops and, Black owned businesses and saying, hey, we have this money. We want to help you stay afloat. How do we help you? This is what we want to do. And so, and then not even that, and this isn't a city thing, but this is a community thing. One of the things that our community did, and I think lots of communities did this, but I know for a fact, Columbia did a really good job at, making sure that we were promoting Black businesses and saying, hey, support this business. And people were very intentional about supporting, Black owned restaurants, Black owned, salons and other things, and making sure that even through the pandemic, even though they might have had to change the way they did business, they still were getting business. So, one of my favorite restaurants, Black owned restaurants, had to pivot and go to, contactless payment and curbside. Sure. And it was a pivot, and it was a struggle at first. I made sure I was eating there once a week at least, to make sure I was supporting that, and I was then posting on my social media, hey, I went here today, had a great lunch, whatever. And I'd have folks like, oh, I've never heard of that place, I'm going to try it now. So to that point, I think people also need to understand everything's not for the government to do. The government can be the person, again, that is creating that culture and creating that environment, but everybody has to be part of it. And so I think that our minority businesses, I don't think that we've lost, percentage-wise, I don't think we've lost a lot more minority businesses than we did white businesses. I know white businesses who have gone out of business due to COVID as well. But I do think that, again, going back to opportunities, I do think as we come out of COVID, we need to make sure that we learn the lessons that COVID posed to us. And then how do you keep pushing to grow these businesses in bigger ways?
And my last question to you, Ms. Devine, is this. Obviously, with COVID,
You can call me Tameika.
Oh.
I'm Tameika to everybody, and
Okay. I'll do that. Okay. Well, as you know, when COVID hit, people stayed at home, and then obviously this past summer we had a lot of protests about obviously police injustice and whatnot. Let me take you to the police department. What kind of procedural and operational changes does the police department have to make to institute community policing?
So actually none. We have been the leader in community policing for many, many years. Now, I would say no changes, but to your specific question on to implement community policing, there's none. I mean, we've been a leader in community policing for many, many years. The Columbia Police Department actually was one of the agencies that were highlighted in President Obama's 21st Century Policing. And so a lot of the things actually last year, recommendations that came from a lot of these studies that, they wanted police departments to implement this policy or do this or do that. We were actually doing most of those things, if not all, because of the fact that we have been a leader in community policing, in reimagining how our law enforcement interacts with the community and how we serve. So that's the general answer to your question. Now, is there always room for improvement? Yes. You don't ever want to, and I tell people this all the time, I'm a lawyer. Right. You wouldn't want to hire me if I did not take any legal education classes since I graduated from law school almost 30 years ago. I mean, that just doesn't happen. So in order to continue to be on your game, you've got to continue to change and evolve. And so our police chief, even last year, he looked at, how do we do business? How do we make stops? How do we interact with communities of color, particularly? I mentioned the stuff that we're doing with mental illness. Right. Most of those things are new because in our conversations this year and even seeing what's happening around the country, we were like, we need to have a policy in place so that our officers aren't responding to issues where there might be somebody having a mental health crisis and they don't know how to recognize that and they shoot somebody or kill somebody. And so we have done those different changes over the last 6 to 8 months to make sure that we're keeping up with best practices, and we'll continue to do that. Our police chief is always looking at ways to stretch himself and to push his officers, and the men and women of the Columbia Police Department are always looking at how can we be better. Just this weekend, I was at a prayer walk, and it was led by the police department and the sheriff's department, and they were out there the whole time talking and interacting with the community. So when you talk about community policing, they're in the trenches all the time. Unfortunately, fortunately, school is about to go back in, but unfortunately, the fact that school was out, that was one of the things that really did concern us, though, because we actually were the first agency in the state that did a program. It's called Handle with Care. And so when officers arrive on the scene and there are kids present, we have a teddy bear and stuff so that can calm down the kid and communicate with the kid. But that next morning, they were communicating with the teacher and the principal, say, hey, there was an incident that happened at this child's house last night. You social workers here in the school might need to, look at this child, talk to them, make sure that there's nothing else going on that, that we need to get involved in. That's the kind of innovative things that we need to be doing. We need to understand that law enforcement has its lane and they're about policing, but you can't solve everything through policing. And that's when people talk about defunding policing, I know there's a whole lot of debate about, what the term is and what that, but the reality is, people aren't too far apart. What people are saying, whether you say defund the police or reimagining policing, what you're saying is that you need to have support for the community so that there are less interactions with law enforcement required. And so to that Handle with Care program, the point of that program is how do we address if there's other issues going on at home? How do you make sure that the school district is aware of it so that if that kid is hungry, if that kid is falling asleep in class, if that kid is, having some emotional or mental health issues, that them and those people in the school who have the kid 8 hours a day are at least aware that they need to be looking deeper and seeing how they can support that kid and ultimately support that family.
Tameika Isaac Devine, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much, Quintin. Thank you I enjoyed talking to you. And anytime you want to talk, I'm ready.
Okay, I'll do that.